How's it going, everyone? So a while back my truck had an issue where the battery leaked all of its acid out onto my alternator. As a result of that, my alternator was fried and I was stuck on the side of the road needing a tow home. So the following video is actually about how I replaced my alternator, and regardless of whether you have a first gen Toyota Tacoma or not, the process is pretty much the same, so the following video should be useful to you. So here's everything that you're going to need in order to do the alternator replacement. So on the far left in the big box, I've got a brand new alternator. In the middle is actually a new distributor cap and rotor, which you do not need for this. Off to the right, I have gloves. Gloves are optional, but you will absolutely prefer wearing gloves than doing this with your bare hands, or else you may spend hours washing the filth off your hands. Believe me, usually alternators are located somewhere in your engine bay that gets bathed in filth, and you're probably going to have black grease up to your elbows, so it's nice to have gloves. Another thing you're obviously going to need is a socket set. It's just held on there by a few bolts, so socket set is what you're really going to need in order to undo the bolts holding your alternator. And there's also a hammer and a flathead screwdriver you've seen here. The reason for this is some alternators have a sleeve in the bracket that goes through where the lower bolt hole goes, and in order to remove that and be able to pull your alternator out, you've got to use a flathead screwdriver and possibly a hammer to pop that sleeve out in order to release your alternator. Now, unfortunately, I've already removed my factory alternator, and I didn't get that on video. However, installation and removal are basically inverses of each other. If you know how to do one, you pretty much know how to do the other. So I'll very quickly walk you guys through how you go about removing it using the brand new alternator as an example. So here's my brand new alternator, and I'm going to use it to explain how I remove the old one. The first part of understanding how to do that is just to know what the different parts are. So let's go through that. This is the upper bolt. The tensioner attaches to here and basically tilts this toward or away right from your engine and puts tension on the belt basically by pushing away from the engine. Here's the lower mounting bolt that goes into the alternator bracket. This pulley obviously gets the belt around it. Then over here you've got a ground strap, and in the back you've got your electrical connector. So the basic way that you do this is to first undo this ground strap, because it's the easiest possible point to remove. You take off one nut, you remove the wire. Then you're going to undo the tensioner, and that's going to release this upper bolt, followed by you undoing the lower bolt. Now you're going to need a wrench on one side and the other because the bolt goes through and grabs a nut. If you try to just loosen this, the nut's just going to spin on the opposite side. So you need to grab this with a socket as well, or a flat wrench, whatever you have handy. You're going to then, once removing the bolt, you're going to put a flathead screwdriver in between the alternator bracket and the alternator, and you're going to pry in this general area because there's a sleeve in the bracket that will lock into this and not let you pull the alternator out of the bracket. Once that's been done, you can then turn your alternator around inside the engine bay and grab the clip on this connector and tug it out. This connector is usually in fairly tight. Sometimes you might even need vice grips, but for sure, when the alternator is in its normal mounted position, it's going to be almost impossible in the Tacoma to get in there and be able to exert enough force to pull it out. So finish everything else first and turn this around, undo this connector, and this will come out like cake. Here's my original alternator. As you can see, it's absolutely bathed in filth. That's like a mixture of dirt, grease, and battery acid. And yeah, it's pretty much done, as you can imagine. And just for perspective, those are the gloves I used in order to pull it out. So just to give you an idea of why you want gloves, there you go. It is a disgusting job, and I heavily recommend you wear gloves, or you will be spending a while washing your hands trying to get that grease out. Believe me, not something you want to do. So here's my engine bay. Looks like it's been raining all night long, so unfortunately I'm going to have to do some drying in order to do this job and, well, not get bathed in watery, dirty grease. Another thing is, I don't want like corrosion to set in between the bracket and the alternator, so I'm going to go ahead and just take a compressor and blast out all the water that I can. If you don't have a compressor, you can use rags, or you can do this on a day when it hasn't rained, right? Alright, so let's take a stab at this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try lowering my alternator into the bracket, which is quite an adventure because there's a coolant hose in the way. Alright, so it seems like the way to get this in. So just grab the coolant hose and kink it like so, and drop it through there. I'm hoping it will fit, but I could be wrong. Let's see what we find. Okay, so one thing I'm noticing is the battery's in the way. So there's a little bracket here for this cable. You want to remove it so it's not in your way when you're trying to put the alternator in through here. Alright, so there's this little stupid sleeve right on the bracket. Not sure if you could see it, but that's the one I mentioned earlier. And in order to let the alternator fit, I had to clean that up and then beat it in with a hammer so it would create enough space for the alternator to fit in there. So now I'm going to drop the new alternator in, and hopefully it goes in drama free. Success. Slid right in where I needed it to. Now let's put the bolt in. The lower bolt, it's going to support it. Alright, that's in. You thread the back of that. I'm not going to tighten this just yet. That's that. So the alternator itself is now in. I'm now going to do the tensioner, and once I get the tensioner set the way I want it, I'll do the lower portion. So first let's move this and get the belt on it, shall we? That's an easy tilt. The belt is on. Now let's do the tensioner. The tensioner kind of goes in here like this. You want to unthread this bolt from this block. You slide it in here. Just thread it in a few threads. Now it's going to go through there and through the upper bolt of the alternator. So, hope you guys can see that. Yeah, you see that. So right now, I'm just threading this block in. I'm only going to thread it in about hand tight because it's too tight and it won't let this tensioner do its job. Alright, so now we're going to thread in this tension bolt by hand until it hits the end of the bracket. Then we're going to tighten it with a wrench until I have the tension that I want on my belt. There is actually a belt tensioning tool that you can put on your belt to make sure that your belt tension is exactly the spec. Go too much more than that. That's nice. So let's lock this tensioner in place. This is just a set tension. This bolt here locks everything in place. Alright. Alright, that bolt is in nice and tight. Now we need to do the bottom bolt. So for the bottom bolt, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a combo. I'm going to use a socket wrench. I'm going to use a flat wrench on the back side. And I think it's borderline impossible to film because it's in such a secluded area, but I'll take a stab at it, see what I can get you guys. Maybe you might have to imagine what I'm doing, but basically there's a lower bolt. It's got a nut on the back just like I showed earlier, so I'm going to put this on the back, and I'm going to take this socket and tighten it on the front. You'll be able to see the lower bolt from up here. So with that done, your next order of business is your electrical connector. It goes around the back of this thing. feel around for it because at this point you won't be able to see it. Here it is. That electrical connector's in. Now it's just a matter, alright, of putting in the upper connector that I mentioned, and we're ready to rock. I put in the rear electrical connector. Now I just gotta put in this electrical connector and we're done. But yeah, that was an alternator install. Now the alternator's back in. It's a matter of putting my battery and everything in back together and we're good to go.